In the winter of 1878, a traveling merchant named Jacob Hensworth arrived in Cedar Valley, Utah, carrying with him a leather satchel that would expose one of the most chilling family secrets in American frontier history. Inside that satchel were genealogical records, birth certificates, and correspondence that revealed the true nature of the Fairmont family, a bloodline that had masqueraded as European nobility for over 30 years, while harboring a genetic predisposition so disturbing that it had shaped 3 generations of calculated cruelty. What Hensworth discovered in those remote Utah mountains wasn't supernatural. It was something far more terrifying. A family that had systematically bred and nurtured the very worst of human nature, passing down not just physical traits, but an inherited capacity for manipulation, violence, and emotional coldness that defied every moral boundary of civilized society. The records he carried contained evidence of murders, disappearances, and a methodical approach to eliminating anyone who threatened to expose their carefully constructed facade. Before we continue with the story of how the Fairmont family's genetic secret was finally revealed, make sure you're subscribed to our channel and let us know in the comments what state or city you're listening from. We love connecting with our audience from across America. The discovery that would unravel decades of lies began with a simple genealogical inquiry, but it would end with the revelation of a family tree rooted in something far darker than anyone could have imagined. Cedar Valley, Utah, in 1878 was a community of roughly 400 souls, nestled between towering red sandstone cliffs and vast stretches of high desert sage. The valley had been settled by Mormon pioneers in the early 1850s, families who had made the arduous journey west, seeking religious freedom and the promise of fertile land. By the late 1870s, Cedar Valley had grown into a prosperous farming community, with well-established fields of wheat and barley, a thriving cattle industry, and a tight-knit social structure centered around the local Mormon church. The Fairmont family occupied the most prestigious position in this small society. Their sprawling ranch, known locally as Fairmont Estate, covered over 3,000 acres of the valley's most fertile land. The main house, an imposing 2-story structure built from local sandstone, sat atop a gentle rise overlooking the entire community, with its carefully manicured gardens, white picket fences, and rows of imported fruit trees. The Fairmont property stood as a testament to refined taste and considerable wealth, unusual luxuries for a frontier settlement. Patriarch Augustus Fairmont, a distinguished man in his early 60s, commanded respect throughout Cedar Valley. His silver hair was always perfectly groomed, and he carried himself with the bearing of European aristocracy. Augustus claimed his family descended from the noble Fairmont line of Yorkshire, England, a heritage he documented with elaborate family crests, imported furniture, and what appeared to be authentic genealogical records dating back to the 1600s. This noble lineage, he maintained, explained not only the family's natural business acumen, but also their inherent superiority in matters of intellect, character, and social grace. Augustus had arrived in Cedar Valley in 1847 with his young wife Eleanor and their infant son Theodore. They had brought with them considerable wealth, enough to purchase the largest tract of land in the valley and establish themselves immediately as the community's social elite. Augustus quickly became a prominent figure in local Mormon leadership, serving as a counselor to the bishop and playing a key role in community decisions. His wife Eleanor, a woman of striking beauty and impeccable manners, led the local Women's Relief Society and was renowned for her charity work and sophisticated social gatherings. The Fairmont children, Theodore, now 31, his younger brother Marcus, 28, and their sister Isabel, 26, were considered the finest examples of young adulthood in the territory. Theodore had inherited his father's commanding presence and business sense, taking over much of the ranch's daily operations. Marcus demonstrated exceptional skill in negotiations and had secured several lucrative contracts for the family's cattle business. Isabel, widely regarded as the most beautiful and accomplished young woman in the valley, had married well to a prosperous merchant family from Salt Lake City, further cementing the Fairmont's social position. The third generation of Fairmonts was equally impressive. Theodore's children, Augustus Jr., a 17, and his twin sister Victoria, along with Marcus's son Edgar, 15, were all exceptional students, natural leaders among their peers, and seemed destined to continue the family's legacy of success and social prominence. Community members often remarked on the remarkable consistency of character across Fairmont generations. Their intelligence, their natural charisma, their ability to inspire both respect and a subtle sense of intimidation in others. What made the Fairmont family particularly notable in Cedar Valley was not just their wealth or social position, but their seeming immunity to the tragedies that befell other pioneer families. While other households struggled with infant mortality, crop failures, and the countless hardships of frontier life, the Fairmonts appeared blessed with unusual good fortune. Their children were remarkably healthy, their business ventures consistently profitable, and their social relationships seemingly free from the conflicts and rivalries that plagued other prominent families. This apparent immunity extended to more serious matters as well. When disputes arose over land boundaries, water rights, or business partnerships, the Fairmonts invariably emerged victorious, often after their opponents suffered unexpected setbacks, failed crops, family illnesses, or sudden financial difficulties that forced them to accept unfavorable terms. Community members attributed this to the Fairmonts' superior breeding and natural intelligence, never questioning whether there might be more calculated reasons for their consistent success. The Fairmont family's influence extended far beyond their immediate community. Augustus maintained correspondence with business associates throughout the Western Territories, and family members frequently traveled to Salt Lake City, Denver, and even San Francisco on various enterprises. These connections had brought considerable prosperity to Cedar Valley, as the Fairmonts often facilitated business opportunities for other community members, further cementing their position as benevolent leaders and protectors of local interests. Jacob Hensworth's arrival in Cedar Valley on that cold February morning in 1878 initially seemed like nothing more than another routine business visit. Hensworth, a professional genealogist and document researcher from Philadelphia, had been commissioned by a wealthy Eastern family to trace their ancestry and verify claims to a substantial inheritance. His research had led him through courthouse records across multiple states, following paper trails that stretched back to the earliest colonial settlements. What had brought Hensworth specifically to Cedar Valley was a discrepancy in inheritance records he'd discovered in the territorial capital. A substantial estate in Pennsylvania, valued at over $50,000, was being claimed by multiple parties, including someone using the name Augustus Fairmont of Cedar Valley, Utah Territory. Hensworth's job was to verify the legitimacy of all claims by examining original documentation and conducting interviews with potential heirs. As Hensworth's horse-drawn carriage made its way down the main street of Cedar Valley, past the simple wooden structures and modest homes that characterized most frontier settlements, the imposing Fairmont estate stood out like a European manor house transplanted into the American wilderness. The contrast was so striking that Hensworth later wrote in his journal that he felt as though he had stumbled upon a piece of the old world mysteriously preserved in this remote valley. Hensworth's first meeting with Augustus Fairmont took place on the afternoon of February 15, 1878, in the elegantly appointed study of the Fairmont mansion. The room itself was a remarkable display of refinement for a frontier home. Leather-bound books lined floor-to-ceiling shelves, oil paintings in gilded frames adorned the walls, and an ornate mahogany desk dominated the center of the space. Augustus received his visitor with the gracious hospitality befitting a man of noble heritage, offering imported brandy and displaying what appeared to be authentic family documents. For the first hour of their meeting, everything proceeded exactly as Hensworth had expected. Augustus produced a leather portfolio containing what seemed to be a comprehensive family genealogy, complete with birth certificates, marriage records, and even a few letters bearing official seals from English parishes. The documentation appeared to trace the Fairmont lineage back through several generations of Yorkshire landowners, establishing Augustus as the legitimate heir to the Pennsylvania estate in question. However, as Hensworth examined the documents more closely, using the trained eye of a professional researcher, he began to notice subtle inconsistencies that troubled him. The paper quality of some supposedly 18th century documents appeared too uniform. Certain official seals, while impressive to the casual observer, contained spelling errors that would never have appeared on authentic government records. The handwriting styles across different decades showed suspicious similarities, as if multiple documents from different time periods had been written by the same person. When Hensworth diplomatically raised these concerns, Augustus Fairmont's demeanor underwent a subtle but unmistakable transformation. The warm hospitality remained, but underneath it, Hensworth detected something that made him deeply uncomfortable. a cold assessment in Augustus's eyes, as if he were being measured and evaluated in ways that had nothing to do with genealogical research. "Mr. Hensworth," Augustus said, his voice maintaining its cultured tone while somehow conveying an underlying threat. "I trust you understand the delicate nature of family histories. Sometimes, the preservation of important documents requires creative measures. Surely a man of your experience recognizes that the spirit of truth can be more important than the letter of documentation." That evening, Hensworth was invited to dine with the Fairmont family, an invitation that felt more like a command than a social courtesy. The dinner took place in an impressive dining room with fine china, crystal glassware, and service that would have been remarkable in New York or Philadelphia, let alone a Utah frontier settlement. Present were Augustus and Eleanor, their sons Theodore and Marcus with their wives, and several of the younger generation of Fairmonts. What struck Hensworth most powerfully during that dinner was not the luxury of the surroundings, but the family dynamics he observed. The Fairmonts interacted with each other with a strange combination of formal politeness and underlying tension, as if each conversation contained multiple layers of meaning invisible to outsiders. When discussing community affairs, family members would exchange glances that seemed to convey complex messages. When the conversation touched on families who had left Cedar Valley or business partnerships that had ended badly, the Fairmonts displayed what Hensworth later described as an almost clinical detachment from human suffering. Most disturbing was the way the younger generation behaved. Augustus Jr. and Victoria, the 17-year-old twins, possessed an adult sophistication that seemed unnatural for their age. They spoke with careful precision, watched the adults with calculating attention, and seemed to understand implications and subtleties that should have been beyond teenage comprehension. When Eleanor mentioned a neighboring family whose patriarch had died unexpectedly the previous year, leaving behind a widow and several young children in difficult circumstances, Victoria's response was, "How unfortunate that Mr. Caldwell proved so inadequate to the challenges of frontier life." The coldness in her voice, combined with the meaningful look she exchanged with her brother, sent a chill through Hensworth that had nothing to do with the February weather outside. After dinner, Augustus invited Hensworth to his study for brandy and what he termed a more private discussion. Once the door was closed, Augustus's carefully maintained facade began to slip. He spoke more directly about the realities of frontier life and the natural selection that determined which families thrived and which families merely survived. He hinted at the various misfortunes that had befallen families who had challenged Fairmont interests, and suggested that successful men understood the importance of adaptability in their moral frameworks. "Mr. Hensworth," Augustus said, swirling the brandy in his crystal snifter, "I hope you'll find that our family documentation meets your professional standards. It would be most unfortunate if technical irregularities were to overshadow the essential truth of our heritage. I trust a man of your intelligence recognizes that some truths are more important than others." The implied threat was unmistakable, but what made Hensworth's blood run cold was the matter-of-fact way Augustus delivered it, as if threatening a professional researcher were simply a normal part of business negotiations. When Hensworth returned to his room at the local boarding house that night, nothing was missing, but the careful arrangement of his papers had been disturbed, and a window that he had left securely latched was now slightly ajar. The next morning brought news that would fundamentally change Hensworth's investigation. Mrs. Patterson, the elderly widow who operated the boarding house, informed him that she had received an urgent message during the night. Hensworth's elderly mother in Philadelphia had taken ill and was calling for him. The message, delivered by one of the Fairmont ranch hands, urged him to depart immediately if he hoped to see her before it was too late. Hensworth knew immediately that his mother was in perfect health. He had received a letter from her just days before his departure to Utah. The fabricated emergency was clearly meant to drive him away from Cedar Valley before he could complete his investigation. What terrified him was not just the obvious deception, but the speed and efficiency with which the Fairmonts had crafted this elaborate lie. It suggested a level of organization and ruthlessness that went far beyond simple document forgery. Rather than confronting the Fairmonts directly, Hensworth decided to play along with their charade while secretly continuing his investigation. He announced his intention to depart immediately, expressing appropriate concern for his mother's health. But instead of leaving the territory, he traveled to the county seat where official records were maintained. What he discovered there would haunt him for the rest of his life. The courthouse records in the territorial capital told a story that contradicted everything the Fairmont family claimed about their origins. According to official immigration and land purchase documents, the family that had arrived in Cedar Valley in 1847 bore the name Fleischer, not Fairmont. Augustus Fleischer had purchased his land using gold coins and bank drafts from multiple Eastern financial institutions. A suspicious pattern that suggested either extraordinary wealth or money obtained through questionable means. More troubling were the records that preceded their arrival in Utah. Hensworth's investigation revealed that a family matching the Fleischer description had been wanted for questioning in connection with a series of mysterious deaths in Missouri and Kansas during their westward journey. In each case, the pattern was remarkably similar. The Fleischers would arrive in a community, establish themselves as respectable citizens, and then various local figures who opposed or competed with them would suffer fatal accidents or sudden illnesses. In Independence, Missouri, a merchant who had refused to sell his store to Augustus Fleischer was found dead in his home, apparently from a heart attack, though neighbors reported he had been in excellent health just days before. His widow, left with debts and no means of support, sold the store to Fleischer for a fraction of its value. In Lawrence, Kansas, a local landowner who had disputed Fleischer's claim to a valuable tract of farmland died when his horse threw him while crossing a bridge that local residents later discovered had been deliberately weakened. The pattern extended beyond simple business disputes. In each community where the Fleischers had lived, families who had achieved social prominence or who possessed information that could threaten the Fleischers' carefully constructed identity would experience a series of escalating misfortunes. Children would fall ill with mysterious ailments. Crops would fail despite favorable weather conditions. Financial investments would collapse after receiving bad advice from trusted sources. What made these incidents particularly sinister was their timing and selectivity. The misfortunes always struck at moments when the victims were most vulnerable, and they invariably benefited the Fleischer family either directly through business opportunities or indirectly by eliminating potential rivals or threats. The precision of this pattern suggested not random misfortune, but carefully orchestrated campaigns designed to consolidate power and eliminate opposition. Hensworth's research revealed that the Fleischer family's true origins could be traced to a small industrial